Welcome everyone. My name is Stefaan Verhulst. I'm here the co-founder of GovLab, based here in New York City, and I'm delighted to have you all join a conversation about a report and a policy paper that we are about to release in final version with Agence France de Développement. So far we have released a draft and today is part of our collection of input with regard to the key messages of the report, and I will share in a few seconds some of the key points that we hope to bring across in the report. But before I go there, let me ask Peter Addo, who is behind all this work at Agence France de Développement, to share a few opening observations.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us. So a few months ago, we had this great idea to work with GovLab to produce something original and unique on the emerging uses of technology. We have less than 10 years to achieving the SDGs, and development practitioners need to innovate and find new ways of making decisions, okay, and also solve some of the global challenges. So we thought of trying to find ways in which we will assess the valued propositions of these emerging uses of technologies, and also find ways of assessing some of the risk associated with these technologies. And in particular, as a development organization, we're also interested in finding ways, what is the decision framework in investing or not investing in these new technologies. This led to this draft that we currently are seeking expert review on, and also inputs today. One of the important things to point out is that this week we have the Paris Peace Forum, and in particular the Finance in Common Summit organized by AFD and some other partners, which is the first summit of public development banks, gathering over 450 public development banks all over the world to discuss some of the rules, business models, some of the challenges like climate, biodiversity, inequality, and so many other global challenges, and to find ways in which we can collaborate together, innovate together, and address some of these challenges to be able to meet the SDGs. And this work and also the webinar is in line with this spirit of the finance in common. So we at AFD are so pleased to have the panelists and also all the participants join us. And it's quite a collaborative effort, and we look forward to some discussion and also participating from the participants. Thank you. Stefan.
Great, thanks Peter for this opening remark, and thanks also for the partnership. This has been a delight to work together. And what I would like to do now is really briefly, in a few minutes, share some of the key concepts that we seek to develop within the paper, which is called Emerging Technologies and Development. And today we specifically focus to tap into the wisdom of some of the development banks within the context, as Peter said, of finance in commons as well. And what we have released so far are two documents. One is a policy brief, and the other one is a policy paper, which indeed has a big stamp that says draft, because we are still soliciting input, through this, of course, webinar, but also we are soliciting input through an open peer review. And those on this call that are interested in actually having an early draft of the policy paper and share their input are still invited to do so. Now, the key concept that we seek to develop in the policy paper is to really take stock and take a step back on what is the real value proposition of some of the emerging technologies that we are seeing across the development world and the developed world in a variety of stages of maturity. And when we started looking at what's the real value proposition, the real value proposition to a large extent from our point of view, and of course not the only one, but one of the key ones that is emerging, is that we are entering a new stage of intelligence, where on the one hand, we see an increase in data intelligence, right? Intelligence that is emerging from the increased availability and use of data. And again, of course, that assumes that data is made available through, for instance, open government data or through data collaboratives. The second type of intelligence is then related to, of course, data intelligence is associated with artificial intelligence, which, as we all know, has made rapid progress the last few years as a result of machine learning. But obviously, the more traditional artificial intelligence methodologies are still also relevant in a variety of contexts, such as, of course, expert models and other kinds of modeling that are based and leverage a variety of algorithms as well. In addition to data intelligence and artificial intelligence, we also see actually technologies enabling the solicitation of input from people and individuals, which we call collective intelligence. So that's a third kind of intelligence that we believe technology has made more available, or at least has enabled development practitioners to tap into expertise that resides in society otherwise not available. And then the last intelligence from our so-called intelligence paradigm is related to what we call embodied intelligence, which refers to, for instance, 3D printing, robotics, and also drones, where obviously there is a certain distinction with artificial intelligence, but quite often would not be able to operate without actually having a certain kind of intelligence embodied within the hardware and the software of those kinds of applications. And so what we've tried to do in the paper is to unpack this intelligence paradigm that is emerging and really trying to understand what are the value propositions of those different intelligences across a variety of areas as it relates to development. And so I'm not going to go through this whole list here. Obviously, there's a lot more detail in the paper as well. But obviously, we see that as a result of the emergent use of technology, we can actually provide for better situational awareness to new forms of experimentation on what works, what does not work, to ultimately also increasing the input in actually the design and the development of initiatives so that it becomes more legitimate and more effective, and so on. Now, the important element is that there are, of course, differences across those intelligences. And so what we've tried to do is to actually develop a list of possible value propositions and then score the relevance of the different intelligences according to those value propositions. Now, in addition to, of course, the benefits, as always, technology obviously has also a darker side. And what we also have tried to identify is to what involves what are the possible risks and negative externalities of some of those technologies that one needs to be aware of when actually advocating and implementing some of those new kinds of intelligences. And I guess I'm not going to go through the long list here, but obviously it relates to loss of data sovereignty, diminished agency, loss of trust if it's not designed proper, to ultimately even environmental and social harms that can be done when actually one uses technologies without a really better understanding of how to mitigate some of those risks. And so what we hope to do today is to actually tap into the wisdom of a variety of experts that have years of experience and expertise in the field, and really test out whether that paradigm makes sense, whether it actually provides value to the ongoing conversations and practice of using technology in the development space, but also to think about how do we then operationalize this, i.e. how do we turn this into a decision tree or in a decision practice to decide where to invest in, how to invest in, and what are the conditions that make sense to a large extent. And so I'm delighted to introduce the panel. We were extremely grateful to be able to bring a variety of expertise and regions together. And so I already introduced Peter, who represents Agence France de Développement, but we also today have Sashi Doshi, who is at USAID and is calling in from Washington, DC. We have Marc Lepage, who is representing the Asia Development Bank and is normally based in Manila, but is calling in from Paris today. We have Nee Quainer, who probably doesn't need an introduction, but represents, of course, his long-standing company, Ghana.com, but is also a professor at the University in Accra, in addition to a variety of other titles. And then we also have Carlos Santizo, who is the innovation lead at the Latin American Development Bank. So with that, let me go straight into some of the issues that I would like to raise and try to stop sharing the screen here, if I can find, oh, there we go. Of course, I only have to click the red button in order to do so. And let me go straight to Nee and get your first reaction, Nee, whether having been part of this ecosystem of and the attempt to introduce technology for development goals, does the position paper, and more importantly, of course, not the paper itself, but some of the concepts, does that resonate with you? And does it provide for a useful frame? And more importantly, should we be aware of some of the regional differences that obviously exist worldwide? And of course, in your context, Nee, meaning, are there some elements from the African continent that we should take into account? So a lot of questions to get started, but perhaps Nee, you can kick us off, and then we can go through the other panelists here.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm pleased to participate. I think an overall reaction is that it's a very good way to focus attention on the purpose of applying technology than the technology itself. And in this case, it's very vivid in the area of interest, which is in intelligence for development. So I thought that was a very good value. And I also agree that the intelligences provide perhaps a pathway to achieving the SDGs by supporting the decisions, in a way, helping to make them have better outcomes. So I can naturally relate to that. Now, with respect to Africa, I also appreciated we are in the early stages of adoption of these technologies, but one can say that it manifests some promise. And the examples that we have in the proposal actually, suggest that it is accessible. It's quite accessible. In other words, I appreciated the embodied products approach to variety of things. I saw the value of the collective intelligence for medical, agricultural, several other areas. The satellites, we've been trying for some time to find adoption for it, but I can see its application with deep learning in maintenance of roads is quite tractable. I can And also a number of countries have ventured into the open data space. For example, in Ghana here, I do know they are continuing to enhance that. And sometimes they have interesting projects that enhance transparency, trying to address corruption and prosecution. And these things also can benefit from these kinds of intelligences to help improve things. On the other hand, since we are at the finance in common situation, I'd like to point at some new other technology with related intelligence worth considering. And this is the programmability of money, or money with intelligence, as in the smart contracts commonly talked about in the consensus-based financial commitments. We see this in the cryptocurrencies world. The central bank digital currencies will have similar flavor, the stable coins and so on. And, you know, money may now have intelligence on how it can be spent. And I think I found this very interesting. I'll stop here.
Great, thanks so much, Nii. And I might come back to that in a second as well. And obviously for the audience, if you have questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A button, which I forgot to mention at the beginning. But let's go to Carlos. And of course, Carlos, you've been focusing on innovation and technology across the world, but of course, lately more focused on the Latin American continent as a result of your current position. So again, same questions that I posed to Nii. Does the intelligence paradigm resonate, or does it make things more complicated? And also, are there some unique perspectives from your end that we need to bring into account as it relates to differences in region?
Yeah, sure. And thanks again, Stefan. Also, thanks for the GovLab to push some of the frontiers in this thinking. Et j'en profite aussi pour saluer tous nos collègues francophones et nos collègues de l'Agence Française de Développement. I work for the Development Bank of Latin America, which is also part of the International Development Finance Club that is participating in the Finance in Common Summit. I'm delighted to be here to share some thoughts from Latin America, but also the perspective from development banks, which is also some of the focus about why this matters to us as bankers at the end of the day. And I think when you look at Latin America, I think the first thing I would underscore is that, you know, this is a very interesting topic at this time because there's a lot of appetite for it in the public sector. And I think there's a lot of demand for new ways to innovate in the public sector and in government in more general, using data insights and new technologies and so on and so forth. And I think that has changed also with the crisis. There's more appetite in the public sector to embed these innovations. And there's also actually more expectation from citizens for governments to respond to those demands. And interestingly, in Latin America, there's also a change of paradigm that goes in parallel, is that you have these new technologies and the going digital all the way, but also the movement around state reform is changing. And for example, if you look at Argentina, they changed the name of their state modernization ministry, the old ways of doing things, to the Public Innovation Ministry, you know, embedding new ways of modernizing the machinery of government. A lot of countries like Brazil and Spain in particular have accelerated their digital transformation strategies, and they're trying really to see how they can incorporate all these insights from different types of intelligence in public policy. And I think that's what is very important to put these linkages between this intelligence and public policies. And I'll come back to that in terms of making sure that these different intelligence are actionable by the public sector. Otherwise, you know, they can be very interesting themselves. And I think we're all struggling because we need to move on. We need to move beyond pilots to scale up solutions and some of these solutions. And I think especially the things around, for example, data intelligence have moved beyond pilots in many countries in the region, and including the artificial intelligence is also moving beyond pilots. And we see some of the countries in Latin America, like Mexico, Uruguay, and Colombia, moving forward on these. And I think that's really exciting. I just, I would just maybe underscore two of these intelligence that I thought were really important for a region like Latin America, where you have a lot of informality, you have a lot of corruption, you have a lot of over-regulation, and you have a lot of, let's say, democratic malaise in many of the countries. Before the crisis, you might recall, people were on the streets in many of the countries in Latin America because they were expecting better services and better government. I think civic participation and what you call the civic intelligence is very important, because it's about renewing and reinventing democracy in the digital age. And I think there's a lot of work there to be done. In Latin America, you have a lot of countries, and in particular cities, that are trying to find ways to involve citizens in the management of public affairs, in what you call collective intelligence, but mechanisms of civic participation, like in Montevideo, or consultation in Bogota, and I think also oversight about these things. So I think this area of around collective intelligence and civic participation is very important as we move forward in terms of renewing democracy. And I think we see that in a lot of countries also, where social media and social aspirations are factors that are not always going into the same direction. The other second field I would say for the region is, like, when you look at a region like Latin America, there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of informality, and I think integrity analytics and the use of data intelligence for fighting and preventing corruption is another really game changer. And I think that's also very interesting, because it's moving beyond pilots. I mean, I think that's the important thing. 5 years, 10 years ago, we were looking at pilots, and they are very interesting, but the scaling of those pilots, the results of those pilots, and one of the points I will make later also is about, showing value for money of those solutions, especially in quality of service, in citizen satisfaction. But I think the issue of integrity analytics and data intelligence against corruption is really also moving forward quite importantly. We see that in specific areas of public policy, like public procurement, for example, or government contracting, where data analytics is really being deployed. You see that in compliance, especially in large multinationals, where they use data analytics to see compliance risk. So when you look at Latin America, for example, the Brazilian Court of Auditors is having like a really interesting data integrity analytics platform called Alice. I mean, I don't know why they call all these data integrity analytics platforms. They always have names of women. I mean, it's amazing. If you look at all the data integrity analytics platforms of Brazil, they have all names. But this one is called Alice, and we're working with the Brazilians to get the 2.0 version. Some of them, the Colombian, they have one that is not named after a woman, that is called the Océano, or Ocean, because it's about the ocean of data. They tend to look at red flagging in a specific transaction, but we see more of this movement going into prevention, in terms of analyzing risk areas, and that goes back to the issue of making sure that these insights are actionable. That's really important. Otherwise, they don't necessarily have the impact.
Great, thanks so much, Carlos, for sharing this, and really to connect it with actually a broader innovation agenda within the public sector as well. And also perhaps we should add an additional kind of intelligence, which could be female intelligence, in order to enrich the other intelligences. And I'm sure Sashi might have an opinion about that. But before we go there, Mark, you, of course, again, have years of experience in the space. Anyway, the concept of technology for development, or IT for development, has been around. And so what we tried to do with the intelligence paradigm was to actually, anyway, broaden it a little bit, but also deepen it at the same time, by actually looking at, anyway, intelligence and hopefully actionable intelligence, as Carlos emphasized, as a way to really think about change in development. So does any of this resonate, or is this déjà vu for you? And also, how does this resonate within the context of the region that you're active, which is Asia, of course?
Thanks, Stefan. And yeah, first and foremost, let me thank you and the GovLab for inviting me. So yes, absolutely, this resonates very much And while there might be, yes, sometimes a bit of a sense of deja vu, the things that we're discussing here are becoming more and more relevant with the advance of computing. And we've not even reached an age of quantum computing. But the whole acceleration of technology is also accelerating the need to look into these issues. You know, way back when we were connecting some of the last countries that were not connected to the internet in different parts of the world, there was the whole discussion about access to knowledge, etc. That was before Wikipedia, you know. So the acceleration of access to knowledge has really been something that we've all witnessed. And with that, with the Spider-Man quote, you know, it comes with great responsibility also. And I think to tie in a sort of model, not only the technology part when we're talking about intelligence, but really the softer part and the collective intelligence is absolutely key. And I really want to praise the authors of this document. Very valuable to bring it all together. Now, how does it resonate with what I do at the Asian Development Bank? It does, absolutely. I work for the digital innovation team within the organization. And while our internal mandate, is mostly internal, we've really been asked in the past few years, and especially even more so with the COVID crisis, to look at digital transformation inside out. And this means tapping a capability that were initially meant for the organization to avoid a bias, to make sure that there's no blind spot when doing concept paper in planning for a loan for government in the region, etc. To make those technology that really further empower ADB staff to make those available to governments in the region and our partner. And I think this is very important as the world, in terms of access to data, because of artificial intelligence, but not only, might be going into a crisis between those, whether private sector or not, who have access to the data and have the sort of technical ability to use this, and those who are somehow left beyond in that data revolution. And I think we will slowly but surely get to a point where we need to face the music. The phrase "in the know" is becoming even more and more relevant. You've got companies, especially, who know you, have your data, and can serve you better. That's all up for debate. And those who can't, and that's true also for public service. So that's definitely a space that we need to be looking at. And probably the key element to look into this is experimentation, and I would add careful intelligence experimentation, and that's what we've been working on. That I'm sure we'll be talking about it later on. Over.
Great, thanks so much, Mark. And Sashi, I want to obviously bring you in here as well. You've done a lot of work on artificial intelligence at USAID. And eager to get your sense on how does this resonate. I mean, obviously, we brought in a few other intelligences in addition to artificial intelligence, and so eager to get your sense on how they all also relate, because I think one of the key messages, I guess, of the paper is that they're actually connected to each other, right? And so we can actually use collective intelligence to improve AI. AI can be used to improve CI, and we actually don't need to look at them as silos, but as perhaps a package. And depending on the problem, we can redefine the package. And so, eager to get your sense, Sashi, on how that relates.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Stefaan, and nice to meet all the rest of the panelists. Thank you for having me. And sorry for the sirens that keep going in my neighborhood. I try to stay on mute as much as I can in Washington, D.C. Yeah, so I think I really enjoyed reading this. And I think that this approach of using the 4 different intelligences is a really good way to bring together so many complex, things that are happening in the technology space in a sort of framework that's easy to digest. So I think in that sense, I really value the way that you've approached this. But as you said, a lot of our work has focused on AI and machine learning. And even as I was reading it, I couldn't help but think that perhaps we need to recognize that AI and machine learning deserves a little bit more weight in the way that we're seeing it play out, in the world, So even as you just suggested, they're all interlinked, but the data intelligence, the collective intelligence, the embodied intelligence, all sort of feed off machine learning in so many applications that we see in order to really derive the kinds of insights that we are, hyping up and seeing and looking at as a way to change the way we do development, the way that we offer assistance to across the world, the way we live our lives on a daily basis. So it's really the machine learning that helps us to do things that, humans can't do as quickly or as rapidly. And so I would say that overlap, is very strong on the machine learning and AI front with the three other intelligences. And even at USAID, we are slowly, I would say slowly, but in many ways also rapidly, starting to recognize the role that technology is playing across all of our work. USAID launched its first ever digital strategy this year. And the Global Health Bureau, launched their digital vision yesterday about how they're viewing digital as a part of their work. They have their own approach to how they use AI. Our team looks very much at a lot of emerging technologies broadly, although AI has been a big focus. So we come across a lot of sort of hyped tech that just because it's flashy and new gets a lot of attention. And I think that even though there is a lot of hype around machine learning and data-driven intelligence, I think that there's something qualitatively different about the way that machine learning operates. It is different in that it can truly transform the way that we do our work and naturally integrate with the work that we do. As we are becoming a more data-driven agency and starting to use digital data collection and digital payments to sort of do our work and our programming, we're just essentially seeing that there's a whole new model for the way that we do our work, where data is at the center of everything. And so given that data is at the center of everything, I think that the way that you have stressed the use of the principles for digital development also really resonated with me, because there's just so much that we can think about with technology that a lot of these principles can help to think through as we are thinking about the use of them. So, working with the user, thinking about open data and open systems, thinking about scale and sustainability, thinking about what's going to happen when the project is over and we are gone. From whichever country we're working in, I think is very, very important as we think about this data. And I think that data visualization is something that is also a very big thing. And the way that we are creating maps, there's a whole team at USAID that does map making. And I think that they're not just relying on like physical data now, they're looking at satellite images, they're looking at social media, they're looking at government data sources that they've had, for years and years about surveys and censuses, and all of that goes into making maps that help to define how how decisions are made. And so I think that mapping technology that also relies on data intelligence, collective intelligence, artificial intelligence, drones sometimes to capture this information is also changing the way that we visualize the world. And so I guess I'll stop there. I mean, there are lots of examples I can give about the way that we're using this technology. And it's, as the other panelists have suggested, it is not really that novel anymore. We see it in health and in finance and in agriculture a lot, and our bureaus are starting to really have teams dedicated to that. And so it's really becoming a part of the way that we do our work. And I think having this kind of a framework is really essential to thinking it through. Yeah, great. There's a lot we can talk about the risks, but I'll stop right now.
Yeah, we will come back to that in a second. And thanks so much. And I do want to bring in Peter as well, if that's okay with you, Peter. And of course, Peter, of course, also has an AI background, and so it would be interesting to get your response to what Sashi was saying and others as well, based upon your experience within AFD, but also, of course, your own background as a computer scientist and an AI expert. So, anyway, how does that resonate? What you've heard so far?
Yeah, it makes sense. Thanks for all the inputs. I think AI has a great role to play to achieving the SDGs if properly designed and used responsibly. Okay? And then we also have this issue on data privacy, right? That the European GDPR. So privacy preserving AI solutions will also be key as we seek to find new ways of applying AI. There are techniques like federated learning, which is likely to, it's one of the next generation AI development, okay? And I think it will help address some of the current challenges that we face when it comes to privacy related issues. That can also lead to obviously certain risks. So I do agree with the panelists on that. And this week, we at AFD, together with the Peking University, in line with the Financing Common, actually, so the data team released the first database for the public development banks, okay? And this was launched, so it's available on the Financing Common website. And this does not exist. It was purely based on AI, NLP, okay, and some expert models. So generating or extracting insights from reports of 453 public development banks, okay, and this was done by NLP and then obviously collective intelligence. To be able to design this, and this information is readily available. So for researchers to look into it and to be able to understand what development banks are actually doing. So this is also opening up discussions for public development banks to know what is actually happening, where they are in terms of financing SDGs. So AI, machine learning, expert models do have a key role. That.
Great, thanks, Peter. And yeah, I think it's interesting to see that. Anyway, we can talk about how it applies for development, but indeed, how do development banks use it internally in order to also improve their own operation? I think is an interesting topic, and I think it's interesting to see indeed that Financing Commons have put it actually at the center of their first ever summit moving forward. Going back, and it seems like the audience is pretty shy, so we don't have any questions yet from the audience. So feel free to, again, put any questions you might have in the Q&A. And if you have any examples or other material that you would like to share with the panelists and with the other audiences, feel free to also put it in the chat so that we also, anyway, have some kind of a sharing of documents and insights here, which is one of the main added values, I would say, of having the Zoom calls, is that actually people can share while we are having the conversation as well. But coming back to Nhi, because one key concern, anyway, we've heard a lot about the potential, but obviously there is a dark side with regard to applying some of those technologies. And one of the dark sides that is quite often referred to is it actually appropriate to the context and to the community and to the problem we seek to solve? And so eager to get your reactions, Nhi, around contextual appropriateness of the use of technology. I mean, you've been a professor working on those issues. And so how do you engage your students around deciding what is appropriate within the context and with regard to the purpose that we seek to, or the problem we seek to address?
Okay, I tend to take the view that there must be sufficient experimentation or adoption for these discussions to become ready. In other words, if you start too early on the appropriateness, perhaps you may not discover what the true So invariably, I tend to subscribe to controlled adoption. Okay, so you try to scale the things that you've piloted and then go on from there, so that in the process, knowledge that is learned about the key issues can be probably discussed. In other words, you see, we're going to have to address both barriers and enablers, okay, both ways. For example, in the area of the barriers, this subject is technical to an extent, or to a large extent in terms of the core production side of the tools. But from the usage side, it requires domain knowledge. Okay. So immediately you have two problems. You have to build up the educational and skills of both sides, of both the domain in which you are applying it, in this case, public development banks, as an example, but also from the technology side. You see, in that regard, I like to weigh in on the comment of the data and the, ML and so on, but the ML needs the data. You see, the ML needs the data, and the data also perhaps needs the ML to understand the data. So it's one of the same thing to some extent, And now, one of the concerns is the data being collected. We need to participate in the process of the data collection. Okay, otherwise you get the data somehow skewed, and then we end up coming back to complain about bias and all kinds of things. So we need to build up that side of it, which, engagement in the data collection process through the adoption, and that way then we might be able to handle that. Of course, to deal with the ethics issues, it's not one side or one size fits all, or only one side decides. We're going to have to engage in more of community discussions, or community decisions, or community recommendations to policy environment, because the issues are going to be so interdisciplinary that so many domains will be using these tools, and all of them may have the same threats, or you might say, dark side, or different ones. So we need to discuss them and make it somehow public what the not so good is, and maybe prescribe some methods of addressing, so that policy may take it over. It may even end up that once the ethics issues are clarified, they are not so much major issue, but in some cases it may lead to different style of governance or even regulation and so on. But most important thing is that we should all accept that we need to apply better way to how we decide. And so if we use the intelligence as a way to decide, then we should all do it, meaning government, civil society, everyone should be trying to apply it in their domain, because the domains are different and the choice of tools and so on will differ. But I'm also interested in the production of tools in our context, and I'm also interested in trying to address local problems. And in a way, I am concluding by saying that we should watch out that there can be an intelligence divide. I mean, we've been through the digital divide, you are evolving. And so the level is getting, the intensity of impact may be increasing. And so we have to also increase our method of removing barriers or adding enablers. Thank you.
Great, Nee, and very valuable. And obviously I would, you could spend a whole day on unpacking some of the issues that you've raised here, but I think they do resonate a lot. And I think one of the questions also in the Q&A refers to the potential for having this kind of data divide that might lead into an intelligence divide if you don't have data that is accessible, let alone collected, of course. And so I would love to get the remaining time, some of the panelists to reflect on that as well. But let me go straight to Carlos and then Sashi and Mark, actually with the same kind of question, because we only have like 10 minutes left.
Right.
This goes always way too fast, and perhaps I'm bad in moderating this after all. But the question is from you're all anyway in some position within a development bank or in a donor kind of context. How do you go about cost and benefit? I mean, I think Nii already identified is that we have to be careful of also the opportunity cost of not doing it, right? Which is why we need to have this kind of controlled adoption. And so how do we make this kind of cost benefit assessment from a development bank point of view and embed that in the practice of actually making decisions as it relates to technology? Is there a practice already? Is this something that the development banks actually should share and develop jointly? A few reactions and short if feasible. Carlos.
Yeah, but just let me also just like jumping on this issue of data, because I think that's critical. What Sasha and Nii and others have pointed out. I mean, one of the issues that we need to pay more attention is the politics of data and the geopolitics of data. There's a gap in the multilateral system about regulation of data standards, for example, but at the local, at the country level also. And I'm part of the bank that provides supports to country, right? And one of the concerns we see in terms of the politics of data in the countries is linked to what you were saying about the digital divide, because if you don't generate a data footprint, then you start not to be captured in the artificial intelligence systems. And therefore the digital divide, you have an issue of access, but I think the data exclusion, you have an issue of, you don't exist because you don't generate data, especially if you don't even have an identity, not even in talking about a digital identity. So this issue, I think, is a big concern about this. I think Spain is also moving into a very interesting things about Charter of Digital Rights that includes about these things, but data inclusion is really going to be a big matter about these things, and that's why I think we need to bring back a little bit more the issue of human intelligence in all of this, right? And don't apply a lot of these things. Quickly, also to your question about, I was thinking about response to your question around what we do in development bank. And again, I'm part of the bank that we support countries. We don't support the corporation itself, right? But I think I would say maybe 2 or 3 points here, right? I think we make often a mistake that we start with the technology. I think we need to start with a problem. We don't sell a digital solution. We buy a policy problem. And I think that we have to be very careful, especially in some areas like blockchain. It seems to be like, like a technical solution looking for a problem, right? Second thing, as a multilateral banks, we don't sell solutions again, and we need to be very wary about being tech neutral. We don't sell the technology of another one. I mean, if a government wants to go to the cloud, it's fine, and you have different providers. And so that's one of the issues about to be also mindful when we do these things. And more specifically about your issue of cost-benefit analysis, I think the whole community of data or intelligence need to be a little bit more rigorous about cost-benefit analysis, especially value for money in terms of deployment of those solutions. We know that a lot of tech solutions in governments have failed, and there have been very expensive failures. And I think we have, as a development banks, an important role to play to embed, for example, rigorous impact assessment or impact evaluation in our loans, especially related to those, so that we generate insights, but more rigorous evaluations of impact. And at CAP, we started to do that, for example, in the deployment of GovTech solutions by startups that are providing service to governments and trying to see the value for money or the return on investment you can have. And I think they're really an important role to generate these insights. But then I will go back again to my last point, really about, I've been like a very fan, Stefan and others about these things, but I think we need to bring the human element back, and human intelligence needs to be part of all this kind of intelligence that you mentioned in your really good paper. I think behavioral science, for example, is really an interesting field, and you need to combine that, you know, the sort of like artificial and human intelligence and how they play out together, including how they link to decision making, how they link to the incentives of public servants and civil servants that need to find solutions, especially procurement agents. But anyway, tiny short. But I think this is a point that I wanted to make, that we need to, you know, we need to bring these two things together more closely, because otherwise we will have challenges.
Great. Sashi, any reactions from your end? Thanks, Carlos.
Oh, so many reactions. I wish we had more time.
Yeah, we only have like 6 more minutes left.
I know, so I'll be really quick. I think I want to say something in response to what Carlos said, you know, about inclusion of data. And Ni alluded to this too. If you're not in the data set, the machine doesn't see you. You don't exist as far as the machine is concerned. So if we want the machine to represent the world, we need the world to be represented in the data. So definitely inclusion is certainly important. But I think another point that always I think tends to get overlooked is what kind of data are we feeding in, right? Like the world is full of biases as we exist. It's full of prejudices. It's full of like different patterns of the way we treat men and women, the way we treat rich and poor, all of that. If that's the pattern we're feeding into the machine is going to feed off of that pattern and amplify it and multiply it. So it's inclusion of data, but it's also thinking about what kind of a world we want to see and how can we make it fairer? How can we make it more even? How can we not continue to represent the inequities that continue to exist in the world? So I think that's also something that we, you know, as the development community need to think about. I think another really important point in getting to that is who is at the table when these systems are designed. So yes, like a lot of this, you know, initially has gotten started in like Western countries, but like there's a lot of talent and data and voices in the developing world as well. They need to be included in the table so that that context is represented, but also that skill is built. And so we are trying very hard to make sure that we fund research in these countries, that we fund educational institutes in this country, so there's local capacity building and that the solutions, quote unquote, are built in the places where the problems are. And then one more thing, you know, I think Ni had talked about a conversation between development people and technologists. And I think that, you know, we need to understand how this technology works, but I think often the technologists are not development experts, right? They are just there to build the model and to build the solution. And I think them understanding what the development world is coming from is also equally important. I just want to make a plug for a research report that we recently funded through MIT, where we are trying to, it's addressed to technologists to make them understand, like if they're building a machine learning based model in the development context, what are the things that they should be thinking about? I can drop the link to that here too. And I think one final thing I'll also say is about governments and, you know, what role we play when we engage with governments across the world. And I think the technology is moving really quickly and regulations are certainly lagging behind that. And so I think enabling the government to be able to keep up to the best that they can, and this is happening all over the world, but I think it's more stark in developing countries. It can really leave people behind. It can leave companies, it can leave the private sector behind, you know, local private sector, while big companies can sort of get around things by different data localization issues or advantages they have. So I think that it leaves people behind, it leaves companies behind if we don't think about how we can advise on regulations that keep up with the development of tech, including privacy, including data localization, cross-border data flows, and local talent. A lot to say, a lot more to say, but I'll just stop there.
Yes, I know, and it's always, anyway, an hour is too short for those kinds of conversations, but I also don't want to infringe on everyone's time. And so, Mark, you have the big task to condense the 5-hour lectures that you can give on this in like 2 to 3 minutes. So what's your point of view with regard to, and actually there's an interesting theme emerging, is that also how can you be more data driven in actually the use of data, for instance, and I think that would be interesting, Mark, to reflect on that.
Thanks, Stefaan. Yes, absolutely. There's a lot to unpack in here. But just to go back to your sort of initial question on the cost benefit, just two pointers. One, for me, and at ADB and other development agency having the same approach, is to have a portfolio approach when it comes to innovation or technology for development or other approach, where you basically have a fairly large number of initiatives that you're working on in many different areas, and have a pretty quick and agile approach, which may means that once in a while you need to kill your darlings, project that you may have quite a lot of sunk cost and spend a lot of time, etc. You just need to move on and find those where it's not necessarily about immediate benefits, but you see that on the horizon you're going to move the needle in a certain area, whether it's in trade finance, whether it's in better infrastructure development, a better evaluation towards getting knowledge, whatever it is that you're doing. And I'm just naming those examples because those are the sort of area where we are working on as the innovation team at ADB. And so that portfolio approach is I think, absolutely key. The second point, maybe when we talk about scaling up, and scaling up has been a bit of an elusive concept for the longest time. Too often when we're talking about scaling up, we think about something bigger. But the whale, it might not be the only scale-up version of a fish. A school of fish might be a scale-up version. And so it might, in fact, be more agile and flexible. And it goes back to the sort of portfolio concept. And those things, given the underlying progress in technology, connectedness, etc., they do allow us to do much more experiment much faster. I mean, Niamh knows, like 20 years ago, setting up a website was a project in itself. Now in 2 clicks for free, you get a website. Setting up a community of practice was the same. All these things, now you can set up your own project team in just a matter of 15 to 20 minutes, and then really focus on actually delivering value to your stakeholder, be government or so. All these tools have really allowed us to go faster and I think go to scale, not necessarily in something that is bigger, because yes, Carlos said it, there's huge challenges with mega project, but something that moves the needle. I'll leave it at that, but for sure a lot to unpack, very valuable conversation that we'd be very interested to follow up down the road. Thanks. Over, Stefaan.
Great. Thanks so much, Mark. And thanks for signing up to a whole series of conversations that will come out of this. But without taking too much time, I want to thank everyone, Carlos, Niamh, Peter, Sashi, and Mark, for sharing your comments. Thanks to the audience. It seems like many had questions, but I think some of them were answered through actually the remarks that were made. And I want to have Peter have the last word of this conversation before we close and have everyone go back to what they are supposed to do, which is, of course, creating value in the world with regard to some of the issues that we have discussed as well. So, Peter, over to you to end this conversation and have the last word.
Thanks, Stefaan. Many thanks to you all. It's been great. I wish we had more time to continue this conversation. It's been awesome, and I think we still have more to say. And I do welcome all of you to sign up for the review process. I think the link will be dropped, and let's continue this discussions and probably open other potential collaborations. I also like to thank all the participants who have joined us. I know some of them have questions, others do not, and I think they will be happy to sign up for the review process. So many thanks to you all, and look forward to continuing the conversations and probably collaborating with you on other works.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe. Bye.